Hello everyone, we are back with another video of our continual home learning, and as you know, right, we've been discussing the Cold War and the situation of communism spreading around the world and the United States attempting to contain and stop that from happening. So I just want to get back to some revision questions, just to get your mind thinking about our last lesson, our last video about the issues with Cuba and the United States and the Soviet Union. So I want you to look at these questions and just think if you can remember what the answers were just off the top of your head. Try and quiz yourself. What were two consequences of the Bay of Pigs invasion? So because the Bay of Pigs invasion happened, what are two things that happened because a result of that invasion or that failed invasion? Okay? And then I want you to think about, how did President Kennedy decide to handle the Cuban Missile Crisis? How did Kennedy, what did he do? How did he decide to go about dealing with this situation of a Cuban Missile Crisis? Okay, so if you want, you can pause the video, you can answer those questions on your own, you can think about it, you can answer it to yourself, as long as you're thinking, reviewing for yourself. So today's lesson is going to be, we're going to focus more on the spread of communism back to Asia, right? We went to Cuba, and we saw the situation with the United States and close to home. Now we're going to go back to this area of Asia where communism has continued to spread. And today we're going to focus primarily on the spread of communism to Vietnam. Okay? So let's just review a little bit of what we have so far. Okay? So we know that communism was created in the Soviet Union. It spread in the Soviet Union. World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union are the two strongest countries that come out of World War II. Right? The Soviet Union had spread its influence. They had controlled a large portion of Europe, right? A large portion of Eastern Europe, and Woodrow Wilson had called, and Winston Churchill had called this idea of that split, right? How Europe was split between communism and capitalism, right? That split was the Iron Curtain, okay? And the Western powers, the United States especially, but also Britain and France, did not want communism to spread around the world, okay? You had situations where the United States, right, are trying to stop communism from spreading without getting involved directly. They use things like the Truman Doctrine, right? If you remember, Truman Doctrine is sending off military supplies to European countries to fight against communism. And also the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan was giving money to European nations so that their economies would not go to the point where people would turn to communism and be a communist revolution. Okay? So the United States had done as much as they could in Europe, and it worked. Right? You remember, it worked. But then there were problems in Asia. Communism had spread to China. China had become communist. Communism had spread to North Korea, right? And you had the Korean War. But communism stays in North Korea. Okay? So you have communism spreading around, and then communism spreads all the way to 90 miles away from the United States in Cuba, and you have the situations that we talked about in the last video. Okay, so up until this point, the United States is not doing a very good job in containing communism. Communism seems to be spreading around the world and seems to be a pretty popular idea amongst a lot of countries who are struggling. Okay, and that's not going to change in our next topic of today. Okay? So we're going to talk about this country of Vietnam. Right? So this is China, right? Korea's up here, Russia's way up there, and there was that fear, right, of the domino effect, the domino theory, where if one country becomes communist, then it would spread all around to the countries around it, okay? And that kind of seems to be happening, all right? But there's a situation in the country of Vietnam. So primarily, let's just go back a little bit further, okay? And we're going to look at how is Asia kind of set up anyway. So the continent of Asia had been, up until this point, for the most part, controlled or colonized okay, by European countries. Okay? Some countries had just recently gained their independence, but others were seeking and fighting in the 20th century for independence from European nations. And that's not going to be any different with Vietnam. Okay, so Vietnam was controlled by the French. Vietnam was a French colony right here, okay, right on the coast. And it wasn't up until 1945 where the Vietnamese wanted to fight for independence, fighting against the French. Okay, so 1945, the leader of this revolution, the leader of this rebellion is a man by the name of Ho Chi Minh. So Ho Chi Minh is communist, and Ho Chi Minh leads a revolution to overthrow the French and to fight the French off and to make Vietnam an independent nation. Okay, so the United States fears of another country, right, being threatened of communism, so they send aid to France. Okay, they send aid to France. They send weapons. They send military resources. They send money. Okay, but France had just fought World War II, and they didn't have enough strength to fight off the. They didn't have enough strength to fight off against the Vietnamese, right, in another war outside of France itself, because they had their own problems to deal with. So by 1954, the Vietnamese had won its independence from France. Okay, they won its independence from France, and what happened is that Ho Chi Minh and his forces, they had kicked out the French, but the United States refused to allow another communist country, right, to emerge. Okay, because at this point, by 1954, you have China, you have Russia, you have North Korea, you have, well, not Cuba yet, but you have the Asian countries. Okay, so what happens is the United States says, okay, well, we're going to hold a national election, and the people of Vietnam are going to decide their fate. The Vietnamese people are going to decide what type of government they want. Okay? So they do the polls, they do the voting, and the United States finds out that overwhelmingly a large majority of the country of Vietnam is going to vote to be communist. So the United States says, no, we can't have that. So the United States allows in Vietnam, right, they force Vietnam to be split into two countries. So you have North Vietnam, which is controlled by Ho Chi Minh, and the United States, they put in their own president, a democratic president, a capitalist president, by the name of Ngo Dinh Diem. Okay, so Ngo Dinh Diem is going to be in charge of the South, Ho Chi Minh is in charge of the North, but we have some problems, we have some issues. Most people in the whole country wanted to be communist. They wanted the country to be united under communism. But the United States influenced the elections and said, no, we're going to split the country in half to avoid another communist country fully emerging. So they divide it amongst the 17th parallel, right? Similar to like Korea with the 38th. Okay, so you have a situation going on. So you have the supporters of communism in the north, and they're called the Viet Minh, right? Those are the people who are communists in North Vietnam. But you also have a group of people in South Vietnam who support communism as well. Naturally, because the United States had avoided Vietnam from uniting and being one communist country. So you have a lot of supporters in the South who support communism, and they're going to be called the Viet Cong. So these two forces are going to be very important in this war, okay, because they both are communists. Okay, the Viet Cong want communism in the South, they want to get rid of the President Diem, they want communism to happen. So you have two groups who support communism. Okay, but this one is in the South. Okay? So a situation happens where the United States gets involved in this whole thing with Vietnam. So before something called the Gulf of Tonkin, the Vietnamese, the Viet Cong in the south were attacking, they were being kind of terrorists in South Vietnam. They were attacking government buildings, they were attacking military because they wanted to overthrow, they wanted to start a rebellion in the south and overthrow the government. So the United States needed to find a way to get involved, okay? And what happens is the Gulf of Tonkin incident where there's an American ship called the USS Maddox, and it is sailing its ship, its Navy vessel, in what is called the Gulf of Tonkin, right next to North Vietnam, okay? So what happened is a ship is sailing around the North Vietnamese, and the ship is sunk. Okay, for whatever reason, the ship is sunk, and the United States blame it on the North Vietnamese and say that they had sunk our ships, and that means that that is an act of war. So this leads to the United States and now another president, President Johnson, who is after President Kennedy. He decides that because of this incident, the United States needs to get involved and defend Vietnam from communism at all costs. Okay? Defend Vietnam from all costs. So, what I want you to do right now, I want you to click this video. The video is also on the playlist of this YouTube channel. I want you to watch that video about the Gulf of Tonkin and see where this all stems from and what is the result of this situation. Okay, so as you can see, right after watching your video, is that the Gulf of Tonkin was a situation, right? The ship was sunk. The United States said that the North Vietnamese did it, and that's how the United States found a way to get involved in the whole situation in Vietnam. Okay. Side note was actually came out by the U.S. government. Within the last decade, the United States has come out and said that the Gulf of Tonkin was a lie, and that the ship sunk for its own reasons, or it was never attacked by any North Vietnamese ships or any North Vietnamese missiles or anything. So basically the United States now, about 50 years later, has come out and said that it was a lie, and they lied about this ship being sunk, and they lied about soldiers being killed so that they can get involved in Vietnam, they could stop communism from spreading. So this shows the extent of the Cold War. This shows how much the United States is willing to go to stop communism from spreading. Okay? So now we're going to talk about a little bit of what happens within that war. So the United States gets involved and they start sending troops. Early on, right, they send only a small amount of troops, but as the years go on, as the years of the war go on, the amount of troops sent over by the United States increases. It escalates. Okay? So basically, a couple of years, about 3 years into the war, over 500,000 soldiers of the United States were in Vietnam, trying to fight this war. Okay? And so at first, the United States government came up with this idea of something called Operation Rolling Thunder. So that means that they were going to just try and send planes without troops. They didn't want to send troops at first, but they were going to send planes and bomb They were going to bomb North Vietnam so that the North Vietnamese would surrender, and they would not have to deal with sending soldiers into Vietnam. Okay, so Operation Rolling Thunder was something that was a big part of the beginning of the war, but eventually they had to send troops. Okay, so what it was like fighting in Vietnam was very, very difficult because the U.S. military wanted to defeat the communists. Okay, but they were fighting two different groups. They're fighting the Viet Minh in the north, but also they had to worry about those anti-American, those communist, terrorist type group of the Viet Cong in the south. And the Viet Cong used a different type of war tactic. So the Viet Cong used something called guerrilla warfare. Okay, so guerrillas, not like the animal, but it's guerrilla like this, spelled this way. Guerrilla warfare is where you basically sneak attack your enemies. So guerrilla warfare was you are attacking your enemy in an ambush, in a sneak attack, and then you would fight for a little bit and then you would run away. So usually guerrilla warfare is used by those who are outmanned, outmatched, and usually weaker than their opponent. But because the only way, because if they went face to face with the United States, the power of the United States military compared to the rebel Viet Cong, they would get destroyed. So they had to find a way to bother the United States military and to defeat them in small little ways, without facing them directly. So guerrilla warfare was the way that the Viet Cong used the tactics in South Vietnam. So usually in a war, if the United States was in South Vietnam, they should be safe, but not when there's the Viet Cong. So the Viet Cong would dress like normal civilians. They would set booby traps. They would they would recruit the people, the average civilians of a town. They would recruit them, or they would threaten them to be on their side. So the villagers would lie. The villagers would set traps for people. So it was really a difficult situation. Also, the Vietnam, they fought mostly in jungles. Okay, they fought mostly in jungles, and the Viet Cong had built these elaborate underground tunnels. These underground tunnels where they could go and they can pop up out of the ground and attack American soldiers, right? And then they would jump down into these tunnels, and they had people that lived in these whole tunnels that were built for way underground. So it was a very frustrating type of fighting for these soldiers. Okay, so I want you to now watch this video about all the different types of fighting, the guerrilla warfare, and things that are going on for American soldiers during Vietnam. If you click that video, or if you're watching a playlist, okay, and you get a better understanding. Okay, so more tactics, right? So the United States had to come up with different ways to try and fight against this enemy of the Viet Cong, right? So they would fight against the Viet Minh in the north sometimes, but a lot of their problems were in the south amongst those fighting those rebels, okay? So the United States soldiers wanted to they didn't want the civilians to be supporting the Viet Minh. So a lot of them pushed out. They pushed out their civilian soldiers, the civilians from the towns. They could not support the soldiers. They would destroy villages, okay? And they were these called search and destroy missions. So the purpose of search and destroy missions was that the United States sent their soldiers to go and search for the Viet Cong, right? Search through villages and destroy everything, okay? Because sometimes they believed that like a certain village, a small little town or village, was supporting these rebels. So what they told them was, go in there and destroy everything. And in some terrible situations, the soldiers would actually go and kill innocent civilians, men, women, and children. Okay? They would burn down the whole villages. They would destroy everything. Okay? What they also used was chemical warfare. So sometimes they wanted to make sure that the Viet Cong could not use any crops, they could not use any food, they could not use anything that the civilians had made for them. So they would spread something called Agent Orange, or they would use something called napalm. So Agent Orange is a chemical that they would spray over huge fields, but if it got on your skin, it would give you chemical burns, and it would basically really give you a really bad burn on your skin, right? There's no fire, but you're burning, right? Because it's chemicals. And napalm is basically this type of chemical fire, right? So you have these chemicals that you would also spray, and it was fire, but it was very hard to put out these fires. It wasn't your normal fire. Okay, it was also like a chemical fire that if it got on your body, if napalm got on your body, it wasn't going to be put out very easily with water or anything like that. So innocent civilians were also caught in the mix of these chemical weapons that were used against them. Okay? And basically, this is why also the United States became very unpopular amongst the civilians of Vietnam. Because how should these civilians trust the United States if the United States is using unintentionally, sometimes, using these types of chemicals on the people or destroying their whole villages. So that's going to lead to more support for the Viet Cong in the South. Okay? But also, there's also this situation where there's going to create unpopularity with the war in the United States. So the United States, a lot of people, okay, did not support this war. They felt that the United States was there for no reason, and the reason that they found out all of these terrible things that soldiers were doing, they found it out because of television. So this was the first war that was kind of really televised, and you had interviewers, you had people broadcasting and interviewing soldiers, like while they're not in battle, but while they are in the battlefield, right? So you would have broadcasters like this going and interviewing soldiers as they are kind of doing their job. Okay, so all of these things led to people disliking the war. The television was a huge part because people could turn on the TV every day and find out how many soldiers have died. They could see what the soldiers were doing. They could see all the bombings that were happening. They could see how the soldiers' lives were, how they were living. And when people see that, it makes them feel bad for the soldiers and they want them to come home. They don't want the war to happen anymore. Okay, so basically because the media let everyone see the war, it created anti-war feelings. But also, situations and stories came to light and came out. Okay, stories like the My Lai massacre. So if you click this video, again, it's also on your playlist, you will see and you will hear the story of the My Lai massacre. This story gets out to the American public, and it also creates a lot of people to dislike this war, but also creates a lot of people to dislike the soldiers who are fighting. Soldiers in this war are not going to be treated as heroes because of the news and how the news showed you the dark side of war. So this incident, this massacre, this My Lai massacre where U.S. troops killed a lot of civilians, also shows you the frustration and the hardships that soldiers had to go through because they didn't know who's the enemy, who's supporting the communists, and a lot of unfortunate people lashed out. Okay, so watch this video and then you can come back and we'll keep going with the lesson. Okay, so, right, as you've seen up until this point, there's a lot of situations going on, there's a lot of frustration, there's a lot of questionable things that are going on in the Vietnam War. But overall, the United States is not winning the war. The war is kind of like a stalemate because nobody's really winning, okay? But in your book, I want you to write down what are the short-term and long-term reasons why the United States entered Vietnam and entered the war. Okay, so think about what was happening before the war, what are the beliefs of the United States before the war, and maybe what happened for the United States to get into the war. Okay, so I want you to think about what are the short-term and long-term reasons, right, why the United States got into the war, and I want you to answer this question. Why was there a large amount, an increasing opposition to the Vietnam War within the United States? So we just talked about this. Why is the United States now looking at the Vietnam War, and a lot of people are saying that they don't agree with it? Okay, so I want you to answer those two questions in your books or on a Word document. Okay, you can pause the video and then come back when you're finished. Okay, so up until this point, right, we know that there's a different, like you've answered in your questions, you know that there's dislike for this war. A lot of it comes from what is the media showing is going on in the war. Okay, so that's one major reason why people dislike the war. Why it's becoming unpopular, because the news is showing you all the bad things the United States is doing, but war is war. But another reason why it's going to be very unpopular is something called the draft. So the United States, they're going to start drafting people to go off to war. The United States wants to stop communism from spreading. but they need more soldiers. So they institute a draft where basically all men over 18 get a number. And then each month they would have this kind of lottery where they would name and say all the numbers of all the draftees, right? So if you were sitting there and in the mail you got your number, if they called your number, you got drafted to go fight. Okay? So you had a lot of people who decided, not to do it. Okay? Their way of opposing this draft was by burning their draft cards or protesting or even going to jail. Okay? So a penalty if you got drafted and you didn't show up was you could be arrested. Okay? Large amounts of university students, young men, 18 to 25, okay, were drafted. And it was mostly lower class, lower income men of minorities, men who were poor, black men, Hispanic men, not many rich upper class white men in the United States were drafted. It was mostly lower income. Okay, and minorities. They were more likely to be drafted to fight in Vietnam. Okay, but there was large amounts of people who refused to go and fight. Right, 500,000 people refused, and they were called draft dodgers. Right, they resisted the draft. Like I said, they protested by burning their draft cards. They protested by willingly going to jail or just refusing. Or some people ran to different countries like Canada or Mexico. People wanted to escape and not support the United States in this war. So there became more and more anti-war protests. So this is where you get this is the age of the hippies, right? Age of peace and love, and younger people are more willing to stand up and voice their opinions. Okay? So a lot of people protested against the war. And you had some situations in the United States where you had conflict between police and military with protesters that even led to some people being killed. Right? You had a situation where on a university campus, 4 students were shot and killed in a protest. Right? There was confrontation, there was conflict between protesters, young students, and police and military, and people opened fire and 4 people were killed. So there's a lot of chaos going on, right? Anti-war chaos. There's a lot of people resisting and standing up for their rights. But eventually, the United States in 1973, basically about 8 years of this war, the United States agrees to make a ceasefire and to make peace with Vietnam. Okay? The United States this is considered a war the United States had lost, because it took 8 years and there was no ground gained. The United States lost a lot of soldiers. They lost a lot of respect. People didn't trust the government anymore. People resisted, and it was the last time the United States has ever instituted a draft. Okay? But the added cherry on top is that in 1975, the North Vietnamese broke the treaty and they invaded and took over South Vietnam, and they made the whole country communist, which is still communist to this day. So ultimately, 10 years the United States wasted on Vietnam, and it ultimately just turned communist anyway. So that's why the United States is considers Vietnam the biggest loss that they ever had. And it's a really bad situation. It's a really embarrassing moment for this fight against communism during the Cold War. So 58,000 U.S. soldiers died. 2 million Vietnamese people, soldiers and civilians, died. And it cost the United States $120 billion. Right? So it's a really bad mark on this Cold War for the United States. It's another win for communism, though. So what I want you to do is, your last task is I want you to create a propaganda poster, okay? And you know exactly what we need to do for propaganda. I want you to create a propaganda poster either supporting the war, fighting against communism, supporting the United States, saying that we should attack and we should get rid of communism and communism is bad in Vietnam, or you're going to create a poster opposing the war, okay, and being just like that younger resistance of war, hippie generation, okay, opposing the war in Vietnam, and you're going to use, I want you to use all the information from this PowerPoint, I want you to use all the information from the textbook pages, I want you to use all the information from the videos to create your opinion. Okay, so the poster must include reasons or facts explaining why you support or why you don't support the war. Don't just say, no more war, and draw a peace sign. That doesn't tell me anything about Vietnam. I want you to include in specific information that's related to Vietnam. So make your propaganda poster either saying, talking about things like napalm, or the draft, or why the United States went to war, or make a poster about protests, or make a poster about the My Lai massacre, making a protest about the Gulf of Tonkin and how the Vietnamese attacked the ship of the United States, or make a poster talking about we don't want the domino effect to happen. I want you to include specific information. Don't just do a peace sign and say no war or stop communism. I want you to really think about how you're either supporting or you're going against the Vietnam War. Okay, and again, if that's too easy and you finish that relatively quickly, I want you to try the hot challenges. All right. Hopefully that this is a better explanation, a little bit easier explanation. You get to see my face, you get to hear my voice, and hope everybody's doing all right out there. And we should hopefully be back in school very, very soon. And good luck. All right, bye.